Hi stamping friends, it's Terry Gaines. A few weeks ago I shared a tutorial on the double twisted ribbon technique where you have 4 different designer series papers and you coordinate 2 of them, and when you finish the technique it appears that you have 2 strands of ribbon twisting and intertwining for your card. In this video I'm going to share the twisted ribbon technique, which is just having one piece of ribbon intertwining to create your card to do the technique. For this technique, it's great for your scraps of designer series paper, but you could also use cardstock. For the card sample I'm going to use for this tutorial, I'm going to use some 1/2-inch strips of cardstock, but you can use designer series paper, and it's, as I mentioned, it's a great way to use up your scraps. So what we're going to need is a base for the twisted ribbon technique, and it can be any height for your card. I'm going to have mine 5.5 inches by 2 inches, but as long as I need to score this base, I'm going to score the entire 8.5 by 5.5 piece of cardstock all at the same time. That's going to save on a lot of prep work if you want to make more than one card. So you can score this using your Simply Scoring tool, or you can use a paper trimmer with a scoring blade. And what you want to do is score every 1/2 inch along the length that you want your technique to be. And for example, this is the double twisted ribbon. I'm referring to this length here. If your orientation of your card was this way, then it would be a shorter piece. But the beauty of scoring a larger piece of paper, you're saving work for the next time you want to create this technique. You will have your base already scored. So if I have my bases at 2 inches, I am scoring 4 all at one time. So that is the beauty of doing this all at one time. So as I mentioned, it's every 1/2 inch, and I'm watching the grid across here, or the ruler across here, and placing this down. And we have a cutting or scoring blade on this cutter and a cutting blade. So now I can go and turn it, rotate it, and bring in the cutter. Now I've created my base with 1/2 inch score lines. It's 5.5 in length and 2 in across the top. Now I have this strip that I can use later for other cards. So I'm done with the paper trimmer. I am going to need 2 things for preparing or adhering. I would highly suggest you use a craft mat if you have that, and your double-sided adhesive. Now I mentioned you can use cardstock strips, and that's what I'm going to do for this, but I want to add a little bit of texture to this. So I ran these through the timber embossing folder. So I don't know if from the video you can see, I just put my strips in my embossing folder and I added some texture to those. So I have crumb cake and soft suede. I'm going to choose to put the lighter color down first. So what I'm going to do is put my adhesive across this strip of cardstock, and what I'm going to do is start at the top corner on the left and go to the first score line on the right, and I'm going to line up the top edge of the cardstock. As I mentioned, I'm going to start at that top left corner and go to the top score line. The beauty of these score lines, they're going to all be hidden once we get this completed. You are going to need a paper trimmer or a paper snips. I forgot, that's a very important tool. I like to turn mine over, and then this blade right here lines up on the cardstock and kind of is my guide for trimming that straight. So I like to trim as I go, and also what's really nice is when I trim this piece here, it's already the right angle for the opposite side. So what we want to do is continue this. Now again, you're going to watch the top of the designer series paper or cardstock, line it up to the next visible score line. When I say visible, it's actually the second score line, because the first score line is already hidden behind this piece. So the first visible score line, which is actually the second score line, angle down, line the top up to the next score line on this side, which actually is the third score line. I know that's confusing. I do have a PDF with pictures and of details that you can download from my blog. There will be a comment in the comment section of this video. There will be a direct link to my blog. So now what you do is you just continue. Take and line up the next strip of paper, the top edge to that score line, and angle down. This first layer angles down. So what you want to do is just trim these as you go. I find it easier if I trim as I go. Why don't I go ahead and trim this edge off? Now this cardstock is not too long because my folder I put it in is only like just slightly less than 6 inches. So my strips are not as long as the cardstock is itself, but that's okay. As long as they're long enough to cross this base, you will be able to do this technique. So as I mentioned, this is perfect for strips of extra designer series paper, but also when we're card creating and paper crafting, we end up with a lot of half-inch strips of cardstock. So you could save those for this technique. So I'm trying to raise it up so maybe you can see closer to the camera how that's lining up. As I mentioned, I do have a PDF that you can download to help you create this technique. Then what we want to do is we want to go all the way down to the bottom base. Now when we get to the bottom here, we're going to line up the top of this strip of cardstock to that fold down to the point of the card base. And by doing that, we're going to keep that consistent spacing between all of those layers. Now in this one, we're going to have more surface to cut off. So I'm going to cut that off straight here and then just use that blade on the paper snips as my guide to cut that. So now we have our first strip down, or our first design. In my instructions, I call it design number 1, whether cardstock or designer series paper. Then you want to bring in design number 2, and I'm going to use a darker color cardstock, so crumb cake, and then I'm going to use soft suede. Now for the first layer, we went down. This layer we want to angle up. In my tutorial PDF, I have you start on this top one, and in reality, it does not matter whether you start with this top one or the second one. For example, what we're going to do is angle up, and you can see that we're lining this, we're going here to here. So why don't I go ahead and put this one down first. So what I'm doing is I'm lining up that top edge. Now you can see between these there's a score line. By going across like that, you are covering up that score line. So then what you can do is turn this around, and you end up with a lot of adhesive pieces here that do collect onto your paper snips, but it's much easier to clean that adhesive off your paper snips than it would be if you brought your paper trimmer in and cut that. So do note that that will happen. And then here, what I'm going to do, why don't we just go up here to finish this one. And then what you can do is go here, and I'm looking at the top piece is right on this corner, the top edge. And then the bottom edge here is right to the point, right to that point. Does that make sense? It's angling up. Now we've got that consistent spacing, and that's what our goal is. So then what I'm going to do is turn this over, use the edge of the blade, this top edge here, to the cardstock, and that's going to help get that trimmed up really nice. Now what I'm going to do is keep adding these strips till I get to the bottom, and I'll try to hold it up so you can see. Now we're looking at the top of this piece. We're going to line up the top, that score line, to this part right here. And by doing that, you are creating the, oops, I'm going to set it down. you're creating the this is the twisted ribbon technique. You can already see how that appears to be a ribbon with each side of the ribbon has a different color. So a fun technique to really dress up your cards. So what I usually do is decide what my image is going to be and then pick my colors for what my embellishment for my card, and then pick the colors for my twisted ribbon. So there you go. So you see what's happening there? And as I mentioned, if you trim as you go, that's going to work out good. And we've got just a couple more pieces left here to put down, but it goes fairly quickly once you have all your prep work done for you. And as I mentioned, when you trim off the one side, it gives you that perfect angle for this side, which means you only have one side to trim off. So I actually have, I think, 7 or 8 additional samples to share with you with the twisted ribbon technique using some other product that Stampin' Up! Has. So let me assemble this card. I'll go ahead and finish this card up and show, and that way you can see why I chose this color scheme. My card base is very vanilla, and as I mentioned, I have here the crumb cake and soft suede. So that is the twisted ribbon technique, and then you can embellish however you would like for your card. What I'm going to do is adhere this to a soft suede, crumb cake is going to be my first layer. So I'm going to adhere this. I have this pre-cut already. Then I'm going to adhere this to soft suede, slightly larger. So my base was 2 inches, my crumb cake was 2 1/4, my soft suede is 2 1/2, so just 1/8 inch on each side. And then I'm going to put this onto a very vanilla cardstock. And I like to put mine off to the side a little bit. And then I'm going to embellish it with this cottage rose flower that I've already stamped, colored in with the Stampin' Up! Blends, and it is part of the Cottage Rose bundle, which is in Stampin' Up's annual catalog. It's this image that we have a dies that will cut those out. So that is what I'm going to adhere this to. So let me go ahead and do that. Anytime I have a flower, I tend to like to add a little texture, and I pretty much do the same thing all the time. I curl it down so I can kind of create a cavity where I'm going to put the dimensionals. But then before I attach it, I also like to just turn some of the tips up and curl them up. That gives it a little bit of texture. And then you can use your take your pick tool to get the backings off. And then going to just add this here. I won't finish embellishing this. I have some additional greenery that I could add in here. You can add a sentiment, but that is why I picked those colors, and I'm really happy. I will include a photo of this on my blog. And as I mentioned, I have a tutorial. As I assembled this card, I snapped pictures to create a tutorial. So I have a PDF that you can download. I will have the link to this video on the PDF, so all you have to do is click it and I'll bring it to this video to assist with assembling any future cards that you want to create using the twisted ribbon technique. Here's some additional cards that I've created. This one is using cardstock. We have the soft succulent and then the blushing bride, and I picked those colors because I started with my embellishment and chose the colors from that. And this is part of the Fitting Florets collection that is available right now. It's available till the end of December, or actually January 4th, I believe. And it's got 2 12 by 12 prints like with these prints, 2 each of the 6 double-sided prints. And I used, this is from one of the designs in here. And so this one, I used designer series paper. This one is from the Awash and Beauty designer series paper. I actually trimmed the image from one of these papers. and the backing is from one of this. I will share what I did for this video, for this one. You can see that one sheet of 12 by 12 is kind of variegated. Part of it's light, part of its one side is dark. I made sure my lighter pieces were on the bottom and my darker pieces were on the top. So that was one piece of designer series paper. I also have several of them that I created with the Hues of Happiness designer series paper, or actually two of them, along with the one for the PDF that I created. And what the beauty of this designer series paper is, you have such a beautiful selection of colors, and it's almost variegated, so you can get many different color combinations out of that packet. So these three are from this. I also have 3 samples that are from the Texture Chic designer series paper, and this is a specialty paper, and this one's actually the double twisted ribbon. You can see there's 4 different prints here, and on this one I have 2 different prints, so you just get such a different look depending on the designer series pattern you use and what design you put on top and what you put on bottom. The last sample I have to share with you is from the He's the Man designer series paper, and you can see that I rotated the card this way, which you can do that and embellish your card that way. This is the He's the Man designer series paper. It is a specialty paper because one sheet of the 6 pieces is actually all these images that are already die cut, and then you have backgrounds on the other side. So that's where this image came from. So this is the twisted ribbon technique. I hope you found this video helpful. As I mentioned, you can go to my blog and download a PDF that will give you some visuals along with some written details on how to duplicate this technique. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this project. I would love to have you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Click the red box under the video, then select the red bell to be notified when I upload a new video. Take care and happy creating!